Ladies and gentlemen, now we are coming to the graduation ceremonial of KDB students. We would like to ask parents to give the trophy to the child. Second daughter of Mr. Adi Hadrian and Mrs. Maya Indriani. For being an excellent futsal player award is presented to Muhammad Arfan Sena Ramadan, the third son of Mr. Ibsen Habib and Mrs. Rini Basir. For being multi-talented award is presented to Clarissa Jasmine Nalendra, the first daughter of Mr. Leon Nalendra Gunawan and Mrs. Windy Holanda. For being obedient award is presented to Zaki Hafiz Khairi, the first son of Mr. Titik Srihartono and Mrs. Nurhayati. For being an excellent animator award is presented to Naira Aprilia Ataila Effendi, the third daughter of Mr. Muhammad Yusuf Effendi and Mrs. Irina Damayanti. Outstanding Attendance Award is presented to Muhammad Rezal Aska, the first son of Mr. Anggi Suherdian and Mrs. Dian Handayani Mampu. For being the best student at Memorizing Quran Award is presented to Widela Rizky Ardina, the first daughter of Mr. Ruli Adrian Ahmad and Mrs. Arshi Hanifa. For being Top Spirit Award is presented to Razi Anwar Sistara, the first son of Mr. Aldana Sistara and Mrs. Puspita Pratiwi. For being Responsible Award is presented to Shanesa Bilqis Siddiqah, the second daughter of Mr. Mukradis Hadi Kusumajaya and Mrs. Nina Purutami. For being Active Award is presented to Muhammad Fajri Shawal, the first son of Mr. Dede Muhammad Yahya and Mrs. Yuli Yuliana. For being Bright and Expressive Award is presented to Kalila Aslima Wahyudi, the first daughter of Mr. Wahyudi Kurniawan and Mrs. Ikrima. For being an Outstanding Listener Award is presented to Abian Dananjaya Nugroho, the second son of Mr. Nugroho Wahyono and Mrs. Anissa Wika Nintias. For being Discipline Award is presented to Kiara Alfrian, the first daughter of Mr. Febrian Shah and Mrs. Elanda Distriana. For being Helpful Award is presented to Muhammad Kenzi Al-Khalifi, the first son of Mr. Dimas Nurdianto and Mrs. Vita Octavianti Ayu Pratiwi. For being kind and caring to others award is presented to Ken Aleka Larasati Kuncoro, the first daughter of Mr. Kuncoro Adi Nugroho and Mrs. Tarita Putri Purnamasari. For being Super Enthusiastic Award is presented to Muhammad Arshad Al-Ghazi, the second son of Mr. Chandra Cahyono and Mrs. Andina Rahmasari. For being Energetic Award is presented to Serafina Mikaela, the third daughter of Mr. Dimas Kuntoaji and Mrs. Chut Nurul Nazira.
Panji Brahmaditya Anargya Pratama, the first son of Mr. Dodi Setiawan Purwantoro and Mrs. Eka Capri Dwipayatna Aditya Larasati.
For being great at music award is presented to Naya Leticia Rahman, the third daughter of Mr. Fatur Rahman and Mrs. Rahmayanti Supiani.
For being enthusiastic in science award is presented to Nabil Mazra Yumna Ikram, the first son of Mr. Fauzal Ikram and Mrs. Aprilia Sylvia Amini.
For being a fantastic friend award is presented to Shaquel Almeida Ayomi, the third daughter of Mr. Simon Alberto and Mrs. Marini Suhesti.
For being creative in art award is presented to Jibril Jethro Faro, the second son of Mr. Ruli Rahmat Ismet and Mrs. Isria Nita. From KDB Al-Hikmah, for being curious award is presented to Astro Pratama Azza, the first son of Mr. Lukman Hidayat and Mrs. Anastasia Dewi Lestiani.
For being a fantastic friend award is presented to Salika Lintang Wikrama, the first daughter of Mr. Ahmad Fari Rafiki and Mrs. Rahmi Meldayati.
For being energetic award is presented to Kevin Kavier Nugraha, the second son of Mr. Andre Prasetya Nugraha and Mrs. Winnie Wulandari.
For being creative in art award is presented to Ainun Altafun-Nisa, the fourth daughter of Mr. Sigit Wibowo and Mrs. Susila Wati.
For being bright Adi Wardani.
For being kind and caring to others award is presented to Alea Fanya Nubarsuki Wijaya, the third daughter of Mr. Alnovanda Suki Wijaya and Mrs. Artantri Ramadhani.
For being High Spirit Award is presented to Atala Firzi Al-Khalifi Ramadan, the first son of Mr. Fiman Al-Farizi Ramadan and Mrs. Elvira Kamarul Putri.
For being an outstanding listener award is presented to Emily Alasia Birawasto, the first daughter of Mr. Adri Birawasto and Mrs. Pidita Sergia Verena.
For being an excellent futsal player award is presented to Asanandra Aulian Safaras, the second son of Mr. Syauki Azam and Mrs. Ali Australia.
For being the best student in memorizing Quran award is presented to Clarissa Maritza Ayunindia, the second daughter of Mr. Dedi Kurniawan and Mrs. Niken Kartika Sari.
For being enthusiastic in science award is presented to Faiz Pramudia Jati, the second son of Mr. Ibnu Bima Fatan and Mrs. Dian Indah Safitri.
For being responsible award is presented to Faza Amira Niuhadini, the third daughter of Mr. Iman Fajar Medi Pantra and Mrs. Tindu Nafi Utami.
For being super enthusiastic award is presented to Ibrahim Khalif Azhari, the first son of Mr. Ricky Azhari and Mrs. Mahani Chaeza.
For being obedient award is presented to Iwana Nadira Wandasya Putri, the third daughter of Mr. Irwan Syah and Mrs. Enda Permana Sari.
For being an excellent speaker award is presented to Muhammad Ramadan Fatahillah, the first son of Mr. Muhammad Hari Agung Julianto and Mrs. Primasari Ragawati.
For being helpful award is presented to Kanaya Salsabila Saidiman, the second daughter of Mr. Agus Saidiman and Mrs. Elina Fitriani.
Agro Bawono and Mrs. Rimaryati.
For being inquisitive award is presented to Muhammad Aufa Atala Aidi, the first son of Mr. Agus Wijaya and Mrs. Novi Susanti.
For being a good leader award is presented to Raden Almalika Makah Dandrika, the first daughter of Mr. Muhammad Maki Danditra and Mrs. Erika Caesaria.
For being an awesome athlete award is presented to Muhammad Fali Herjuno, the fourth son of Mr. Sri Mulyono and Mrs. Nurbaiti.
For having an outstanding attendance award is presented to Nayaka Rashid Haristo, the first son of Mr. Mahardika Ariwibowo and Mrs. Riza Afriyani Margaresa.
For being an awesome helper award is presented to Safia Nazifa Mahira, the fourth daughter of Mr. Muhammad Aji Sujarwo and Mrs. Irfani Fitria Umul Muzayana.
For being discipline award is presented to Sultan Arfa Salim, the second son of Mr. Agus Salim and Mrs. Yulismi. From KDB Al-Kalam. For being the best at memorizing Quran award is presented to Altaf Bayanaka Arif, the first son of Mr. Arif Wandi Musirwan and Mrs. Betty Puji Astuti.
For being disciplined award is presented to Aurora Nadim Dewa, the first daughter of Mr. Adi Chandra Dewa and Mrs. Andriwina Kartika Sari.
For being an excellent futsal player award is presented to Devano Alfa Nafis, the second son of Mr. Fatli Rahmatullah and Mrs. Devina Wulansari.
For having an outstanding attendance award is presented to Clarissa Anindya Ramadhani Lamantu, the second daughter of Mr. Vino Yudesa and Mrs. Saridia Novitawati.
For being kind and caring to others award is presented to Febrian Aska Zikri, the first son of Mr. Jimmy Irawan and Mrs. Lisa Maria.
For being a good leader award is presented to Florence Libera Harmawan, the second daughter of Mr. Rudy Harmawan and Mrs. Ellen Sumitro.
For being bright and expressive award is presented to Gani Al-Akbar, the first son of Mr. Tubagus Muhammad Kurniadi and Mrs. Kurnia Soraya.
For being an outstanding listener award is presented to Hafsa Mahdia Rizkianingdia, the third daughter of Mr. Purwanggoro Satrio Hadi and Mrs. Sekar Inati Nupia Rizki.
For being a fantastic friend award is presented to Juno Giani Jafar, the first son of Mr. Guntur Gani Prakoso and Mrs. Lenggo Geni Putri.
For being inquisitive award is presented to Hasya Altafun Nisha, the first daughter of Mr. Muhammad Iksan and Mrs. Pani Yulandari.
For being an excellent animator award is presented to Kenzi Kavier Nugraha, the first son of Mr. Andre Prasetya Nugraha and Mrs. Winnie Wulandari.
For being responsible award is presented to Khaira Nazifa Zafira, the third daughter of Mr. Muhammad Aji Sujarwo and Mrs. Irfani Fitria Umul Uzayana.
For being energetic award is presented to Kevin Putra Kartika Dewa, the first son of Mr. Ari Kartika Dewa and Mrs. Uti Anas.
For being helpful award is presented to Maura Kinantian Kusuma, the first daughter of Mr. Ahmad Faisal Nila Kusuma and Mrs. Nunik Indrayati.
For being High Spirit Award is presented to Masaru Sabik, the first son of Mr. Radon Delika and Mrs. Rahmi Sari Dewi.
For being an outstanding performer award is presented to Safaira Kiona Triandra, the first daughter of Mr. Muhammad Suhendra Putra and Mrs. Fitri Yuniastria.
For being obedient award is presented to Muhammad Ashraf Habibi, the first son of Mr. Faris Budi Arifianto and Mrs. Dia Sulistiowati Rahayu.
For being creative in art award is presented to Sheila Amalia Kusmana, the second daughter of Mr. Adik Kusmana and Mrs. Nina Christiana.
For being active award is presented to Muhammad Dafa Al-Khalifi, the first son of Mr. Sulyo Adi Putranto and Mrs. Inditya Hapsari.
For being a graceful dancer award is presented to Zia Kalia Ailin Septianto, the first daughter of Mr. Ari Septianto and Mrs. Ayu Primadewi.
For being an excellent speaker award is presented to Maufal Kamil Al-Farasi, the second son of Mr. Zulfikar Arif and Mrs. Dia Fitria Palupi.
For being super enthusiastic award is presented to Teku Razin Zufar Hamizan, the first son of Mr. Teku Yudian Shah and Mrs. Resi Anova Ramli. For being creative in art award is presented to Sheila Amalia Kusmana, the second daughter of Mr. Adi Kusmana and Mrs. Nina Christiana.